Day 27, February 27th, 2026. Nearly a month since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her Tucson home, and the investigation just took an unexpected turn. Not because of new evidence about Nancy, but because law enforcement itself is now divided. A retired NYPD expert just publicly accused Sheriff Chris Nanos of fueling conspiracy theories. An FBI source claimed he's blocking evidence, and a fellow officer called this investigation an ego case. At the same time, the FBI just determined that major video evidence everyone thought would crack the case is actually a dead end. So what's really happening with the Nancy Guthrie investigation? Is the controversy helping or hurting the search for an 84-year-old woman who's been missing for almost a month? Let's break it all down. Before we get into the controversy, if you've been following this case, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. This investigation is developing every single day, sometimes multiple times per day. I'm covering every major development as it happens, and you don't want to miss updates. Now let's talk about what just happened in the last 48 hours. Let's start with the evidence update, because this is what actually matters for finding Nancy. On Thursday, February 26th, Fox News Digital released exclusive Ring camera footage that initially seemed like a major breakthrough. A neighbor who lives about 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, that's outside the original 2-mile search radius that investigators had been focusing on, this neighbor had a street-facing Ring camera that captured 12 vehicles passing by between midnight and 6 a.m. on February 1st. That's the exact window when Nancy was abducted. Now here's why this seemed so significant. The timing lined up almost perfectly with the known timeline of Nancy's abduction. We know from doorbell footage that an armed masked suspect approached Nancy's front door at 2:12 a.m. We know that Nancy's pacemaker, which was synced to her iPhone via Bluetooth, disconnected at 2:27 a.m., which means either the device was physically removed from her body or she was taken far enough away that the Bluetooth signal dropped. And this new Ring camera footage showed vehicles traveling past at 2:31 a.m. and 2:36 a.m. That's just 4 to 9 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker lost connection. The location also made sense tactically. This neighbor's house sits on Camino Real, which is a back road that leads directly out of Nancy's neighborhood while avoiding major intersections. If you were trying to leave the Catalina Foothills area quickly without being seen on main roads, this would be a logical escape route. North Campbell Avenue, which is the main road, runs right past the University of Arizona and has much heavier traffic even at 2:30 in the morning. But Camino Real? It's quiet. It's residential. There's rarely anyone out there, and according to neighbors, you never see police cars patrolling it. Pat Brosnan, a retired NYPD detective and national security expert, reviewed this footage with his team and reportedly believed that the vehicle captured at 2:36 a.m. could be significant. The homeowners who provided the footage, Elias and Danielle Strataguleas, told Fox News that police had never canvassed their neighborhood, despite living on what appears to be a viable escape route. They found it odd that in 25 days of investigation, no one from law enforcement had asked them for their Ring camera footage. So this looked promising. 12 vehicles, perfect timing, logical escape route, previously unchecked footage. It seemed like the kind of break investigators desperately needed. But then, less than 24 hours later, TMZ reported something that disappointed everyone following this case. According to a source connected to the investigation, the FBI reviewed the Ring camera footage and determined it's a dead end. The area where the vehicles were traveling, combined with the traffic patterns observed, led investigators to conclude that these vehicles have no association with Nancy's kidnapping. Now, TMZ didn't provide specific details about why the FBI reached this conclusion. We don't know if they were able to identify all 12 vehicles and eliminate them. We don't know if the route analysis showed that these cars weren't actually coming from Nancy's neighborhood. We don't know if there's some other piece of information that ruled out this footage, but what we do know is that as of February 27th, the FBI does not believe this Ring camera evidence will help solve the case. This is frustrating for obvious reasons. It looked like such a solid lead, but it's also not the first time in this investigation that promising evidence hasn't panned out. Remember the backpack that volunteers found near Nancy's home? It visually appeared to match the Ozark Trail backpack worn by the masked suspect in the doorbell footage. Investigators collected it, analyzed it, and then determined it was a different brand, not the same backpack, not connected to the case. Remember the doorbell camera images that the FBI released? There's been significant confusion about when those photos were actually taken. FBI Director Kash Patel said the images were captured the morning Nancy disappeared on February 1st. But two law enforcement sources told NBC News that at least one of the images was captured on a different date, possibly weeks earlier, potentially showing the suspect conducting surveillance of Nancy's property on January 11th. Sheriff Chris Nanos called that reporting purely speculative and said authorities don't have evidence the images were from different days. But the point is, without timestamps, because Nancy didn't have a Nest subscription that would have automatically saved and timestamped the footage, investigators can't definitively prove when each image was captured. So we've had multiple instances now where evidence that seemed significant either didn't pan out or created more questions than answers. That doesn't mean the investigation is failing. It means this is an incredibly difficult case. But it does help explain some of the frustration that's building both within law enforcement and in the public. Which brings us to the controversy that's now dominating headlines. Sheriff Chris Nanos, who's been the public face of this investigation since day one, is facing intense criticism from multiple directions. And this criticism isn't coming from random people on social media. It's coming from other law enforcement professionals, including a retired missing persons expert and a sergeant within his own department. Let's start with Michael Gould. Gould is a retired Nassau County lieutenant who founded the NYPD's elite canine unit and served as the department's canine training officer. He's got serious credentials in missing persons cases, which frequently utilize police dogs for search operations. Gould spoke exclusively to Daily Express US and did not hold back in his assessment of how Sheriff Nanos has handled communication in this case. Here's what Gould said, and I'm quoting directly. The sheriff is not a trained public information officer, and his continued one-off interviews have created confusion and fueled conspiracy theories. Gould went on to say that he does not believe Nanos is the appropriate spokesperson for an investigation of this magnitude, and he criticized the sheriff for failing to delegate that responsibility to someone with professional media relations. Training. Now, it's important to note what Gould is and isn't saying. He explicitly stated that his criticism is not about the investigative work itself. He said both the FBI and local investigators are working diligently on the case. His issue is specifically with communication, with how information is being shared with the public, and with the impact that Sheriff Nanos' media appearances are having on public perception of the investigation. Gould didn't provide specific examples of statements Nanos made that he considers problematic. Instead, he focused broadly on the sheriff's overall approach to media engagement. But when you look at Nanos' media presence over the past 26 days, you can start to see what Gould might be concerned about. Sheriff Nanos has given multiple high-profile interviews on News Nation, NBC News, Fox News, and ABC. He's been the consistent voice providing updates, answering questions, and trying to manage public expectations about the investigation. In some of these interviews, Nanos has had to walk back or clarify previous statements. In others, he's had to address rumors and speculation that have taken on a life of their own. And in a few cases, his comments have themselves become news stories that generate additional speculation rather than providing clarity. This is exactly the kind of dynamic that a trained public information officer is supposed to prevent. PIOs are specifically educated in how to communicate complex, sensitive information to the media in ways that inform the public without creating additional confusion or conspiracy theories. But the criticism of Sheriff Nanos isn't just coming from outside his department. Sergeant Aaron Cross, who is the president of the Pima County Deputies Organization, has been even more direct in his assessment. Cross described the investigation as an ego case for Sheriff Nanos, accusing him of prioritizing media appearances and public relations over substantial investigative progress. Here's Cross's statement. It is a common belief in this agency that this case has become an ego case for Sheriff Nanos. An unidentified source within the department added this. The sheriff turned a serious investigation into a rolling spectacle, from questionable decisions to shifting narratives and a disastrous media cleanup tour that raised more questions than it answered. Now we need context here. Sergeant Cross is not a neutral observer. He's been a longtime vocal opponent of Sheriff Nanos, including during the most recent Pima County Sheriff's election. Cross supported Nanos' opponent in that race, so there's definitely political tension between these two individuals that predates the Nancy Guthrie case. Additionally, Sheriff Nanos is a Democrat, and some of the outlets amplifying this criticism, like the New York Post, lean conservative. So there may be political motivations at play in how this criticism is being reported and emphasized. That doesn't automatically make the criticism invalid, but it does mean we should consider the source and the context. Sheriff Nanos himself responded to these criticisms in a statement to Parade magazine. He said, "Right now, Our focus is on this investigation and serving the victims and this community. Internal or political commentary distracts from this active investigation, and it is very unfortunate. My focus remains on justice and transparency. That's a pretty measured response. He's not engaging directly with the specific accusations. He's positioning the criticism as a distraction and reaffirming his commitment to the investigation and to transparency. But there's another layer to this controversy that goes beyond communication style and media strategy. There have been reports of tension between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI over how evidence is being processed. Reuters quoted an unidentified U.S. law enforcement official who claimed that Sheriff Nanos has been blocking evidence from going to the FBI's lab, instead insisting on sending it to a crime lab in Florida. According to this source, the sheriff's insistence on using the Florida lab instead of FBI facilities is impeding progress and prolonging the timeline for getting results. The official said, and I'm quoting, "It's clear the fastest path to answers is leveraging federal resources and technology. Anything less only prolongs the Guthrie family's grief and the community's wait for justice." That's a pretty strong statement. It's essentially accusing Sheriff Nanos of making a decision that's actively slowing down the investigation and extending the suffering of Nancy's family. Sheriff Nanos denied this accusation forcefully. He told NBC affiliate KVOA, "Not even close to the truth." He explained that he spoke with the FBI on Thursday morning about submitting gloves that were found near Nancy's property to the FBI lab, but he talked the agency out of it because he believed there was a faster path through the Florida facility. According to Nanos, the Florida lab specializes in the type of DNA analysis needed for this case, particularly when dealing with mixed DNA samples, and they can process results more quickly than the FBI lab. So who's right here? Is Sheriff Nanos making a tactical decision based on which lab can deliver results faster? Or is he refusing to utilize federal resources for reasons that aren't clear? Without being inside the investigation, it's impossible to know definitively. What we do know is that DNA results are taking a long time. Sheriff Nanos has said publicly that DNA analysis could take weeks, months, or possibly even a year to complete. And we know that the DNA recovered from Nancy's home and from the gloves found 2 miles away is mixed DNA, meaning it contains genetic material from multiple individuals, which makes analysis more complex. For context, mixed DNA can be incredibly challenging to process. You're essentially trying to separate out genetic markers from different people when those markers are all jumbled together in a single sample. Modern forensic techniques can do this, but it requires specialized analysis, and it takes time. The DNA has to go through something called genetic genealogy, which is the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer Joseph James DeAngelo back in 2018. This process involves uploading the unknown DNA to publicly accessible genealogy databases, not looking for an exact match to the suspect, but looking for distant relatives like second, third, or fourth cousins who share enough genetic markers that you can identify common ancestors and build a family tree. Then investigators use traditional detective work to narrow down that family tree and eventually arrive at a pool of potential suspects. It's an incredibly powerful technique. It has revolutionized cold case investigations. But it's also time-consuming even when everything goes perfectly. So the fact that DNA results are taking months doesn't necessarily indicate that something is wrong with the investigation, or that Sheriff Nanos made a bad decision about which lab to use. It might just reflect the reality of how long this type of analysis takes. But perception matters, especially in a case that has this much public attention. And the perception that's developing, whether it's fair or not, is that there's dysfunction within the investigation. That law enforcement agencies aren't working together seamlessly, that the sheriff is more focused on media appearances than on investigative work, that decisions are being made for the wrong reasons. Again, I'm not saying these perceptions are accurate. I'm saying these are the narratives that are taking hold, and those narratives can have real consequences. One of those consequences is what happened to a man named Dominic Evans. Evans is a 48-year-old fifth-grade teacher in Arizona. He has absolutely no connection to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. He's never been named as a suspect or even a person of interest by law enforcement. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI have not indicated in any way that he's involved, but online sleuths, amateur detectives on social media who are trying to solve this case, became convinced that Evans might be the masked suspect captured on Nancy's doorbell camera. Why did they focus on Evans? Because he plays drums in a band with Tommaso Cioni, who is married to Nancy's daughter Annie Guthrie. Some people thought Evans physically resembles the suspect in the doorbell footage. And in the vacuum of official information, In the absence of law enforcement identifying an actual suspect, these online theories gained traction. Evans was doxxed. His home address was leaked online. Dozens of people showed up outside his house overnight. He and his wife had to send their children away for their safety. Evans gave an interview to the New York Times where he said, "I feel like someone's taken my name. I don't know why people are doing this, whether it's for monetary reasons, clickbait to be relevant, entertainment, but there are innocent people that get hurt." He and his wife confirmed they were home with their children on the night Nancy disappeared. They've fully cooperated with law enforcement. And Sheriff Nanos has publicly confirmed that the Guthrie family, including all siblings and spouses, has been cleared as possible suspects in this case. Sheriff Nanos actually showed real empathy for what Evans is going through. When asked about the impact on Evans, Nanos said, "He's going through hell, and it is horrible. And I don't know what to tell him except he probably should be speaking with some attorneys and sue some of these people for libel." That's the sheriff of Pima County telling a citizen to consider legal action against people spreading false information about him online. And this gets to the heart of why the criticism of Sheriff Nanos' communication strategy matters. When official information is unclear, confusing, or contradictory, it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled with speculation, conspiracy theories, and amateur detective work that can destroy innocent people's lives. Dominic Evans is a perfect example. He's a teacher. He has a family. He has nothing to do with this case. And his life has been turned upside down because people online decided he looked like someone in a grainy doorbell camera image. This isn't just happening with Evans. There have been multiple viral social media posts claiming Nancy's body was found in a pond near the Catalina Foothills. TikTok users posted videos with AI-generated voice narration and recycled footage from completely unrelated cases, claiming that Nancy had been discovered floating in water with signs of struggle. These videos got millions of views. Snopes had to publish a fact check debunking the claims. The Pima County Sheriff's Department had to publicly deny the reports, but the damage was done. Nancy's family had to see those videos. They had to experience the emotional roller coaster of false reports about their mother's body being found. So, when experts like Michael Gould say that Sheriff Nanos' communication approach has fueled conspiracy theories, this is what they're talking about. Not that Nanos is intentionally spreading false information, but that unclear or confusing communication from official sources creates an environment where false information can spread more easily. Now let's talk about where the investigation actually stands as of day 27. The FBI has collected as many as 10,000 hours of video in this investigation. 10,000 hours. That's 416 days of footage if you were to watch it continuously without stopping. And every single video has to be watched in real time by human investigators. You can't just use AI to scan through it and pull out relevant clips, because what looks irrelevant to an algorithm might actually be crucial evidence to a trained investigator. When footage needs to be slowed down or enhanced to get a better look at a license plate or a person's face, that process takes even longer. The FBI official who confirmed the 10,000-hour figure described the collection, review, and analysis of video as one of the key parts of this investigation. And it makes sense. In a case where the physical crime scene has been processed, where DNA is going to take months to analyze, where there's no identified suspect and no one in custody, video evidence becomes absolutely critical. Somewhere in those 10,000 hours might be the footage that shows the suspect's vehicle, or shows the suspect at a different location before or after the abduction, or shows some detail that connects to other evidence. On Friday, February 27th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued an update saying that investigators are now reviewing videos of vehicles traveling in the Catalina Foothills area, including areas farther from Nancy's home than they'd previously searched. They've asked homeowners in the surrounding community to submit relevant footage. They didn't specify exactly how far from Nancy's home they're now searching or which specific areas they're focusing on, but the fact that they're expanding beyond the original 2-mile radius suggests they're being thorough. The FBI is also in the process of releasing Nancy's home back to her family, possibly as soon as this weekend. After 26 days of treating the property as an active crime scene, after multiple comprehensive sweeps by dozens of investigators, after collecting every piece of physical evidence they believe that location contains, law enforcement has determined that continued control of the residence isn't necessary for the investigation. The family will finally be able to access their mother's home. They'll be able to go through her belongings, retrieve personal items, begin the painful process of sorting through a life that was violently interrupted. But releasing the crime scene also signals something about where investigators believe this case stands. It means they don't anticipate finding Nancy at or near that location. It means the investigation is transitioning from active crime scene processing to a different phase, one focused on intelligence analysis, forensic work in laboratories, and following up on tips. The physical location where Nancy was taken has given investigators everything it's going to give. There's been new activity at Nancy's home in recent days. On Wednesday, February 25th, drone footage captured by media outlets showed multiple detectives in Nancy's backyard by the pool, passing through a gate to the back patio. Law enforcement was seen carrying bags of items out of the residence. Former FBI Special Agent Lance Lysing commented on this activity, saying it's common to go back to a crime scene for various reasons. Maybe you're bringing new investigators who need to see the scene in person. Maybe a new agency has joined the investigation and needs to be briefed. Maybe lab analysts need to visit to get a better understanding of the physical context for evidence they're processing. Or maybe prosecutors are visiting the scene, which can happen later in an investigation when they're preparing a case. But Lysing also noted that the fact investigators were carrying bags of items out after 25 days is a little unusual. He said he'd be very curious what those items are and how much value they hold for the case. Were these items of evidence that were somehow overlooked during earlier sweeps? Were they personal belongings being returned to the family? Were they materials related to the investigation that are being moved as the command post relocates? We don't have answers to those questions. Speaking of the command post, the FBI has confirmed that some of its operations in the search have been moved from Tucson to Phoenix. This doesn't mean they're scaling back resources or giving up on the case. It's actually a pretty standard operational shift when an investigation moves from the initial crime scene processing phase to the intelligence and analysis phase. In the first few weeks, you need a massive physical presence at the scene. Crime scene technicians, evidence collection teams, search and rescue personnel, all coordinating from a local command post close to the action. But once that physical work is complete, once you've processed the scene and collected all the evidence you can from the location, the focus shifts to analyzing that evidence. And that analytical work, reviewing 10,000 hours of video, processing DNA through genetic genealogy, coordinating tips from all over the country, managing a multi-agency investigation that's more efficiently done from a centralized facility where all your resources and technology are concentrated. The FBI's main Arizona office is in Phoenix. Moving command operations there while maintaining boots on the ground in Tucson makes operational sense. As of February 27th, Savannah Guthrie posted a new video on Instagram renewing her emotional plea to whoever has her mother. She wrote, "Someone out there knows something that can bring her home. Somebody knows. We are begging you to please come forward now." She emphasized that tips can be anonymous and that the family reward of up to $1 million can be paid in cash. That cash detail is significant. It's designed to incentivize someone who might have information but is afraid of being traced or identified. You can come forward anonymously, provide information that leads to Nancy's recovery, and receive $1 million in cash, no paper trail, no public exposure. There are also reports that Savannah intends to return to work at NBC's Today Show at some point. When that might happen is completely uncertain and entirely up to her. An NBC source said her Today family will welcome her back with open arms on her timeline. For Savannah, as impossible as it might seem to resume work, it might also provide some sense of normalcy and routine during the most unsettling chapter of her life. She's been away from the show since the last week of January. Hoda Kotb, who had departed the show back in January 2025, returned to fill in for Savannah during this crisis. The fact that Savannah is even thinking about returning to work might reflect a recognition that this investigation could continue for a very long time, that there may not be quick resolution, that life has to continue even while the search for her mother goes on. Earlier this week, for the first time, Savannah publicly acknowledged that her mother may already be gone. She said, "We still believe in a miracle. We still believe that she can come home. We also know that she may be lost. She may already be gone. And if this is what is to be, then we will all accept it. But we need to know where she is. We need her to come home." That statement represented a turning point. For the first 3.5 weeks, the family's public messages were focused entirely on hope, on faith, on believing in miracles, on refusing to accept anything other than Nancy coming home alive. But at some point, reality has to be acknowledged. The statistics are brutal. Elizabeth Smart, the kidnapping survivor who was held for 9 months before being rescued, said in a recent interview, "If a person disappears and they're not found within the first 24 to 48 hours, the chances of their survival drop down to almost 0%. I mean, it's almost like they're dead. In stranger abduction cases, 74% of victims who are ultimately murdered die within 3 hours of being taken. Within the first 24 hours, that percentage climbs even higher. We're now at 26 days. That's 624 hours. More than 25 times longer than that critical 48-hour window. Does this mean Nancy is definitely deceased? Absolutely not. Elizabeth Smart herself is proof that people can survive extended captivity. J.C. Dugard was held for 18 years. Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus were imprisoned for over a decade. But statistically, those outcomes are rare. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has stated that this will remain an active investigation until Nancy Guthrie is found or all leads are exhausted. They're refocusing resources to detectives specifically assigned to this case. As leads are developed and investigated, they're being pursued. The investigation is not winding down, but it is evolving. It's moving from the frantic, all-hands-on-deck search operation of the first few days to a more methodical, analytical approach focused on forensic evidence and intelligence work. So where does all of this leave us on day 27? We have an investigation that's entering its second month with no publicly identified suspect, no arrests, and no confirmed sighting of Nancy since the night of January 31st. We have 10,000 hours of video being reviewed, DNA analysis that could take months or a year, and over 40,000 tips that investigators are working through. We have law enforcement professionals publicly criticizing the sheriff for his communication approach and accusing him of creating confusion and fueling conspiracy theories. We have tension between local and federal agencies over evidence processing. And we have a family that's desperately seeking answers while trying to prepare themselves emotionally for any possible outcome. The controversy surrounding Sheriff Nanos and his handling of communication in this case is not going to solve the mystery of what happened to Nancy Guthrie. It's not going to identify the masked suspect captured on doorbell footage. It's not going to lead investigators to Nancy's location. But it does matter because clear, professional communication from law enforcement helps maintain public trust, helps prevent the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories, and helps protect innocent people like Dominic Evans from being destroyed by false accusations. Whether Sheriff Nanos is the right person to serve as the public face of this investigation is ultimately a question for the people of Pima County and for the agencies working this case. What we can say is that this is an extraordinarily difficult investigation. The perpetrator clearly planned this. He disabled the doorbell camera. He left minimal physical evidence. He chose a time window when Nancy would be vulnerable and neighborhood activity would be minimal. He apparently knew enough about Nancy's situation to target her specifically, and he's managed to evade identification for 26 days despite one of the most intensive missing persons investigations in recent Arizona history. This case is solvable. Someone abducted Nancy Guthrie. That person exists. They live somewhere. They have routines. They make mistakes. They left evidence behind. And eventually, the combination of forensic analysis, video review, tip follow-up, and good old-fashioned detective work should converge on a suspect. But it requires patience. It requires the community to remain engaged. It requires people to keep sharing Nancy's story and to keep looking at that doorbell footage and asking themselves if they recognize anything about that person. If you have any information at all about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, call the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-225-5324, or call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. Remember that tips can be anonymous and the family reward of up to $1 million can be paid in cash. Someone out there knows something. If that someone is you, now is the time to come forward. Nancy Guthrie is someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's friend. She deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers. And whoever did this deserves to be held accountable.
Day 27, the investigation continues.